November 2014. The morning fog clung to the brick buildings of St. Augustine Seminary like a shroud, muffling the sounds of early morning prayers. 3 unmarked police vehicles pulled into the circular driveway at exactly 6:47 a.m., their headlights cutting through the grey dawn. Father Thomas McKenna was leading morning meditation in the chapel when Detective Sarah Rodriguez knocked on the heavy wooden doors. What began as a routine morning of spiritual reflection transformed into the most shocking arrest in Boston's ecclesiastical history, as investigators finally solved a murder that had haunted the city for 52 years. Before we dive into this incredible story that mainstream media couldn't fully capture, please like this video and subscribe for the hidden details they left out. Margaret Rose Sullivan was born March 15, 1943, in South Boston, to Irish immigrants Patrick and Catherine Sullivan. At 20 years old, Margaret stood 5 feet 4 inches tall with striking auburn hair and piercing green eyes that her younger brother Timothy described as able to see right through to your soul. Her father worked as a longshoreman at Boston Harbor, while her mother took in sewing to supplement their modest income. Margaret was the eldest of 4 children, followed by brothers Timothy, Michael, and sister Colleen. Margaret was the light of our family, her mother Catherine would later tell investigators. She had this way of making everyone feel special. Friends described her as deeply devout but not sanctimonious, someone who attended daily mass at St. Bartholomew's Church, but also loved dancing to the Beatles and dreaming of becoming a teacher. She had recently been accepted to Boston Teachers College to specialize in elementary education. Margaret worked part-time at Donnelly's Five and Dime store on Washington Street to save money for college. Boston in 1963 was a city on the cusp of dramatic change. With a population of just over 670,000, it remained deeply segregated along ethnic lines. The Irish dominated South Boston, where St. Bartholomew's Parish served as the spiritual and social center. The Gothic Revival Church, built in 1928, anchored a complex that included an elementary school, convent, and rectory. Father Timothy Flanagan served as pastor, while the younger associate pastor, Father Thomas McKenna, had arrived just 18 months earlier, after his ordination. The working-class Irish Catholic community was tight-knit and insular, consisting primarily of 3-story wooden houses housing multiple generations of families. Crime was relatively rare, consisting mainly of minor thefts and occasional fights between neighborhood boys. October 23, 1963, began ordinarily for Margaret Sullivan. At 6:30 a.m., she attended daily mass at St. Bartholomew's, where Father McKenna celebrated the service. At 7:15 a.m., she stopped at Murphy's Corner store to buy milk, exchanging pleasantries about the unseasonably warm weather. Margaret helped prepare breakfast for her siblings before beginning her walk to Donnelly's Five and Dime at 9:20 a.m. During her lunch break at 12:30 p.m., Margaret met her friend Patricia O'Malley at Flanagan's Diner. She was practically glowing, Patricia remembered. She kept talking about how she was going to change the world, one student at a time. Margaret returned to work at 1:15 p.m. and spent the afternoon helping customers. At 4:05 p.m., Margaret clocked out and began her usual route home. At approximately 4:20 p.m., Mrs. Eleanor Kowalczyk heard Margaret's distinctive laugh coming from the direction of St. Bartholomew's Church. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Margaret Sullivan alive. Church custodian Patrick O'Brien arrived at 6:15 a.m. the following morning to find the sacristy door unlocked, unusual since Father Flanagan was meticulous about security. Upon entering, O'Brien discovered Margaret's body in the small storage room behind the altar, where vestments were kept. Margaret lay on her back, still wearing her blue wool coat and white blouse. Her purse sat undisturbed nearby, containing her wages and a small prayer book. The medical examiner determined she had been strangled with a liturgical rope. There were no signs of sexual assault, but investigators found puzzling evidence. A button from a clerical collar beneath her body, strands of black fabric on a storage cabinet, and muddy footprints from dress shoes. The crime scene contained other disturbing elements. A lit votive candle placed near Margaret's head, her hands folded across her chest in peaceful repose, and a handwritten Latin note in her coat pocket, Peccata patris in filios, the sins of the fathers upon the children. Can you imagine discovering something so shocking in your own neighborhood church? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The Boston Police Department's Homicide Division consisted of just 12 detectives covering the entire city. Lead Detective James Murphy immediately recognized the complexity of investigating a murder within the Catholic Church hierarchy. Forensic technology was limited to fingerprinting, basic blood typing, and photographic documentation. Detective Murphy's investigation focused on 5 primary suspects. Robert James Hennessy, age 24, worked as a maintenance worker at St. Bartholomew's. Margaret had complained about his inappropriate comments, but his landlady confirmed he never left his room the night of October 22nd. No evidence connected him to the crime. Vincent Anthony Moretti, age 19, had argued with Margaret 2 weeks before her death when she refused a date. Despite an inconsistent alibi, Moretti was functionally illiterate and couldn't have written the Latin note. David William Thompson, age 31, was a traveling salesman who had shown unusual interest in Margaret's routine. His sales records eventually corroborated a timeline making his involvement virtually impossible. Kevin Patrick O'Malley, Patricia's brother, had developed an unhealthy fixation on Margaret since returning from military service. However, he had been arrested for public intoxication on October 22nd and spent the night in jail. Father Daniel Joseph Walsh, age 45, had received informal complaints about inappropriate behavior with young women during confessions. Despite the church's reluctance to cooperate, forensic examination revealed no physical evidence linking him to the crime. Each suspect was thoroughly investigated, but 1960s forensic limitations made definitive conclusions impossible. By spring 1964, with President Kennedy's assassination absorbing police resources, the case went cold. Margaret's death devastated the Sullivan family across generations. Patrick Sullivan, just 47, never recovered from the loss and began drinking heavily, eventually losing his job and forcing the family to move to a smaller apartment. Catherine transformed her grief into fierce advocacy, visiting Margaret's grave daily and attending every police meeting to raise questions about the unsolved murder. Timothy Sullivan was inspired to pursue law enforcement, eventually becoming a Boston police detective and spending his 30-year career advocating for victims' families. Michael became withdrawn and struggled with depression and alcohol abuse before eventually healing and establishing a successful carpentry business. Colleen, the surviving daughter, felt pressure to replace Margaret while battling survivor's guilt, never marrying and dedicating her life to preserving Margaret's memory. The family established annual memorial services and a scholarship fund at Boston Teachers College for working-class women pursuing education careers. Margaret believed education could change the world, Catherine explained. This scholarship is her legacy continuing to touch lives. The case was formally reviewed multiple times. In 1975, advances in fingerprint analysis were applied to the liturgical rope, but results were inconclusive. In 1983, computer databases cross-referenced similar crimes throughout New England, identifying 3 potentially related murders, but revealing no meaningful connections. In 1995, when DNA analysis first became available, evidence was too degraded to produce a clear profile. What's the weather like where you are? Sometimes cold cases are like waiting for seasons to change. The breakthrough came on March 15, 2015, Margaret's 72nd birthday, when Detective Lisa Chen received a call from the Massachusetts State Police Laboratory. Advances in mitochondrial DNA extraction had finally allowed scientists to develop a profile from 1963 evidence. The profile matched a sample from a 2010 DUI arrest. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the supervising forensic scientist, explained, "Mitochondrial DNA is much more stable than nuclear DNA and can survive for decades. The fabric caught on the storage cabinet had been preserved in climate-controlled conditions, and we extracted enough material for analysis. The technique is 99.7% accurate in establishing maternal lineage. The DNA profile pointed to Father Thomas McKenna, now 74, and serving at St. Augustine Seminary. McKenna's name had never appeared on suspect lists during the original investigation. As a newly ordained priest in 1963, he was considered above suspicion, a blind spot reflecting both 1960s social attitudes and the Catholic Church's institutional power to shield clergy from scrutiny. Share a like if you're finding this story as shocking as we are. The revelations ahead are even more disturbing. After Margaret's murder, McKenna was transferred to St. Augustine Seminary in 1964, officially for theological studies, but likely to remove him from the crime scene. He excelled academically and gained recognition as a brilliant theologian, eventually becoming vice-rector responsible for student discipline and spiritual guidance. He authored several theological books and was frequently invited to religious conferences. Most chilling was McKenna's calculated involvement with the Sullivan family. Beginning in 1965, he attended annual memorial services, presenting himself as a concerned priest offering spiritual comfort. He gradually ingratiated himself with Catherine Sullivan, becoming a regular visitor who offered prayers and counseling during their darkest moments. McKenna convinced Catherine that he had received spiritual insights about Margaret's death during prayer, claiming God revealed that Margaret was at peace and her killer would face divine justice. These false revelations provided comfort while allowing him to monitor the family's emotional state and police developments. At the 20th anniversary service in 1983, McKenna told mourners, "Margaret's spirit lives on in all of us who remember her goodness. Though we may never understand why she was taken from us, we must trust in God's plan and continue her work of bringing light into darkness." The cruel irony of her killer delivering these words while her family wept represents one of the case's most disturbing aspects. Dr. Robert Hellman, a forensic psychologist, explained, "Some perpetrators derive satisfaction from inserting themselves into their crime's aftermath. They enjoy consoling victims' families, while knowing they cause the pain they're pretending to heal. It's psychological dominance that can be as addictive as the original crime." McKenna also gathered information about the police investigation through his relationship with the Sullivan family and church connections, allowing him to adjust his behavior and avoid suspicion for 5 decades. The arrest operation on November 18, 2015, was coordinated between Boston Police, Massachusetts State Police, and the District Attorney's Office. At 6:47 a.m., Detective Chen approached the seminary chapel where McKenna was leading morning prayers. When asked to speak privately, McKenna's first words were reportedly, "I've been expecting you for a very long time." The search of McKenna's quarters revealed disturbing trophy items: Margaret's missing gloves, a prayer book with her name inscribed, newspaper clippings about her murder maintained for 52 years, and a journal recording his thoughts about the murder and satisfaction at the Sullivan family's continued suffering. What theories do you have about how he maintained this deception for so long? Share your thoughts in the comments. McKenna's trial began September 15, 2016. Despite his advanced age, prosecutors sought life without parole, arguing that the premeditated murder and decades of psychological torture warranted maximum penalty. The prosecution's case rested on DNA evidence with probability of error less than 1 in 10 billion, plus items found in his quarters and journal excerpts containing what prosecutors called a detailed confession. McKenna's defense argued he suffered from dementia and was incompetent to stand trial, but court-appointed psychiatrists found him competent despite some cognitive decline. During victim impact statements, Timothy Sullivan told the court, "This man didn't just kill my sister, he tortured my entire family for 50 years. He sat in our living room and pretended to comfort us while knowing he was the source of our pain." Colleen Sullivan said, "I spent my entire adult life afraid to trust people because the monster who killed Margaret was hiding behind a collar and pretending to be holy." Judge Robert Morrison sentenced McKenna to life without parole on November 23, 2016, stating, "The defendant's crimes extend far beyond Margaret Sullivan's murder. His systematic psychological torture of the victim's family over 5 decades represents cruelty that defies comprehension and demands maximum penalty." McKenna showed no emotion and declined to make any statement. The case has had lasting impacts on law enforcement and church policies. Boston Police now requires cold case reviews every 10 years using advanced forensic techniques, and the case trains investigators about preserving physical evidence, regardless of current technological limitations. The Catholic Church implemented additional seminary screening and ongoing psychological evaluation of clergy. The case contributed to broader conversations about institutional accountability and transparency in addressing crimes by religious figures. Catherine Sullivan died in 2012, 3 years before her daughter's killer was identified. Timothy Sullivan said, "I believe Mum knows somehow that justice was finally done." Michael established a foundation providing college scholarships for young women from working-class families, ensuring Margaret's educational dreams continue impacting new generations. The case demonstrates the crucial importance of DNA evidence preservation and potential for solving decades-old cold cases. It serves as a sobering reminder that evil can hide behind trusted institutions and that justice, while sometimes delayed, must never be abandoned. Margaret Sullivan's murder was solved 52 years after her death, but her legacy of hope, education, and family devotion continues inspiring those who remember her story. The case proves that some crimes may go unpunished for decades, but with advancing science, dedicated investigators, and families who refuse to give up, even the coldest cases can find resolution. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into cases that mainstream media doesn't fully explore. We have dozens of similar stories about cold cases solved through modern forensic science. Please share this video and let us know in the comments what other unsolved cases you'd like us to investigate. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light and ensuring victims like Margaret Sullivan are never forgotten. In the wake of McKenna's arrest, St. Augustine Seminary faced unprecedented scrutiny from both law enforcement and the Catholic hierarchy. Archbishop William Cardinal O'Malley ordered an immediate internal investigation, led by retired FBI agent Patricia Donnelly, now working as a private investigator specializing in institutional misconduct. The investigation would reveal a pattern of suspicious behavior that had been overlooked for decades. Seminary records showed that McKenna had requested specific assignments that put him in contact with young women from the surrounding community. Between 1965 and 2010, he volunteered for hospital chaplaincy duties, taught catechism classes to teenage girls, and insisted on conducting confession sessions for female parishioners. Several former students and parishioners came forward after his arrest, describing uncomfortable encounters they had previously attributed to their own misunderstanding. Maria Santos, now 63, recalled her interactions with McKenna in 1978 when she was a 20-year-old seeking spiritual guidance after her father's death. He would ask very personal questions during confession that didn't seem related to forgiveness, she remembered. When I mentioned feeling unsafe walking alone at night, he became intensely interested in my daily routine. What time I left work, which streets I took home. At the time I thought he was just being protective, but looking back it feels predatory. The seminary's administration had received at least 3 formal complaints about McKenna's behavior between 1985 and 2005. In each case, the complaints were handled internally through prayer and counseling rather than proper investigation. Father Robert Hayes, who served as rector during the 1990s, admitted during testimony to the Diocesan Review Board that we were trained to view such complaints as tests of faith rather than potential criminal behavior. Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, a criminal psychologist from Harvard Medical School, spent 18 months studying McKenna's case for a comprehensive profile that would later be used in training law enforcement and seminary officials. Her analysis revealed a sophisticated predator who used religious authority to manipulate and control victims. McKenna represents what we call an institutional predator, Dr. Hartman explained. He specifically chose a profession that would provide him with unquestioned authority, access to vulnerable individuals, and built-in protection from scrutiny. The collar wasn't just a disguise. It was a weapon he used to disarm people's natural defenses. McKenna's journal entries, discovered during the search of his quarters, provided disturbing insight into his psychology. Written in a mixture of English and Latin, the entries dated back to 1964 and continued through 2015. They revealed a man who viewed himself as engaged in a cosmic battle where normal moral rules didn't apply to him. One particularly chilling entry from December 1968 read, "The Sullivan girl continues to provide lessons in the power of divine authority. Her family turns to the church for comfort from the very evil that dwells within it. They pray for peace while unknowingly seeking it from the architect of their suffering. God works in mysterious ways, and perhaps I am his instrument of testing their faith." Dr. Hartman noted that McKenna never expressed remorse for Margaret's death, instead framing it as a necessary sacrifice in some twisted theological framework he had constructed. "He genuinely believed he was chosen for a special purpose," she observed. "This wasn't simply a murder followed by decades of guilt. It was the central organizing principle of his entire adult life." Margaret Sullivan's case became a catalyst for revolutionizing how Boston police approached cold cases. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, who made the arrest, was promoted to lead a newly expanded cold case unit with dedicated funding for advanced forensic analysis and full-time investigators. The success in solving Margaret's murder led to renewed interest in 17 other cold cases from the 1960s and 1970s. Within 3 years, the unit solved 6 additional murders using similar DNA techniques, bringing closure to families who had waited decades for answers. Detective Rodriguez implemented a revolutionary approach called evidence archaeology, where investigators systematically re-examine old evidence using modern techniques. "We treat each piece of evidence like an archaeological artifact," she explained. "Something that seemed insignificant in 1963 might be the key to solving a case today." The unit also established partnerships with genealogy companies and amateur investigators who volunteer their time to help identify suspects through DNA analysis. This collaboration led to the creation of the New England Cold Case Cooperative, sharing resources and expertise across state lines. The Margaret Sullivan case became a landmark in forensic DNA analysis, featured in textbooks and training programs worldwide. The Massachusetts State Crime Laboratory used techniques developed for this case to solve over 40 cold cases across New England. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who supervised the DNA analysis, received the International Association of Chiefs of Police Award for scientific achievement. Her team's work demonstrated that mitochondrial DNA could be successfully extracted from fabric evidence stored for over 50 years, opening new possibilities for cold case investigations globally. The case also highlighted the importance of proper evidence storage. Items from Margaret's murder had been stored in climate-controlled conditions and carefully catalogued, making the successful DNA extraction possible. Many police departments updated their evidence storage procedures based on lessons learned from this case. Cardinal O'Malley's investigation led to significant changes in how the Boston Archdiocese handles criminal allegations against clergy. New protocols require immediate notification of law enforcement for any credible allegations of criminal behavior, regardless of when they occurred. The seminary implemented mandatory psychological screening every 5 years for all faculty and staff, conducted by independent mental health professionals rather than church-affiliated counselors. Background checks now extend beyond criminal records to include interviews with former parishioners and colleagues. Most significantly, the Archdiocese established a victim advocacy program staffed by lay professionals rather than clergy. The program provides counseling, legal assistance, and support for anyone affected by clerical abuse or misconduct. The Margaret Sullivan Educational Foundation, established by her brother Michael after the trial, has grown into a significant force for social justice in Boston. The foundation provides full college scholarships to 40 young women each year, specifically targeting first-generation college students from working-class families. Recipients of the Margaret Sullivan Scholarship, known as Margaret's Daughters, maintain connection with each other and the foundation throughout their careers. Many have become teachers, social workers, attorneys, and community leaders who continue Margaret's vision of using education to create positive change. Scholarship recipient Dr. Carmen Rodriguez graduated from Harvard Medical School in 2019 and now works in community health in Roxbury. "Margaret's story taught me that one person's dreams can touch countless lives," she said. "Even though her life was cut short, her impact grows stronger every year." The Foundation also sponsors an annual symposium on cold case investigation techniques, bringing together law enforcement, forensic scientists, and victim advocates from across the country. This event has become a premier training ground for investigators working on decades-old cases. The success in solving Margaret's murder has inspired police departments nationwide to re-examine their oldest unsolved cases. The Boston Police Cold Case Unit now serves as a training center for investigators from around the world who want to learn advanced evidence analysis techniques. Digital technology has revolutionized the investigation process. Computer programs can now analyze crime scene photographs from the 1960s to identify details that human investigators missed. Pattern recognition software can compare fingerprints, handwriting samples, and even behavioral patterns across decades of evidence. Social media has also become an unexpected tool for cold case investigators. Facebook groups dedicated to unsolved murders often generate tips from people who remember details from decades ago. The Margaret Sullivan Case Facebook page, maintained by her family, has over 15,000 followers who share memories and information about Boston in the 1960s. McKenna's conviction had implications far beyond Margaret's murder. His case was studied by the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit as an example of how predators can operate within trusted institutions for decades without detection. The case influenced legislation in Massachusetts, requiring mandatory reporting of suspected criminal behavior by religious officials, with criminal penalties for failure to report. Similar laws have been adopted in 12 other states, using Margaret's case as a model for closing institutional loopholes that protect criminals. Insurance companies now require religious organizations to carry specific policies covering criminal behavior by clergy, and many organizations have hired risk management consultants to identify potential problems before they escalate into criminal activity. Throughout all the legal proceedings and institutional changes, Margaret Sullivan's family has worked to ensure she is remembered as more than just a murder victim. They've created a memorial garden at St. Bartholomew's Church, where Margaret attended daily mass, featuring flowers that bloom year-round and a bench where visitors can sit and reflect. The garden includes a bronze plaque with Margaret's photograph and the words she wrote in her diary just weeks before her death. "I believe every person deserves someone who sees the best in them and helps them reach their full potential. That's what teachers do. We see the light in every child and help them shine." Each year on Margaret's birthday, the garden hosts a ceremony where scholarship recipients read essays about how education has changed their lives. These events draw hundreds of community members who find inspiration in Margaret's enduring vision of hope and possibility. Timothy Sullivan, now retired from the Boston Police Department, serves as a volunteer coordinator for the memorial events. Margaret would be amazed to see how her dreams have grown, he reflects. She wanted to change the world one student at a time, and through the foundation and the scholarship recipients, that's exactly what's happening. The Margaret Sullivan case continues to influence criminal justice and forensic science as new technologies emerge. Researchers are developing even more sophisticated DNA analysis techniques that may eventually solve cases where no biological evidence currently exists. Artificial intelligence programs are being trained to analyze decades of evidence and identify patterns that human investigators might miss. The Cold Case Unit is beta testing software that can correlate seemingly unrelated evidence across multiple jurisdictions and time periods. Most importantly, Margaret's story serves as a reminder that victims deserve justice regardless of how much time has passed. Her case proves that families should never give up hope, investigators should never stop searching for truth, and society must remain vigilant against predators who hide behind positions of trust and authority. The fog that surrounded St. Augustine Seminary on that November morning in 2015 has lifted, revealing truth that had been hidden for over 50 years. Margaret Sullivan's murder is solved. Her killer faces justice, and her legacy continues to inspire positive change in the world she dreamed of improving through education and compassion. Justice delayed is not justice denied when dedicated investigators refuse to abandon their pursuit of truth and families refuse to let victims be forgotten.